What's going on, everybody, and welcome to Wheel of Time Diary number 7. I think that's the number we're on, and I think that's how counting works. If it's not, you'll probably know by the title, description, maybe the description, I don't know, the title and the thumbnail, at least, of this video, which Wheel of Time Diary this is. But this is the second episode for The Great Hunt, so I guess it would be number 7. Because, like I said, I'm pretty sure that's how math works. This week of reading has been pretty great, just all around, but especially where this book is concerned. There's been some really great stuff going on. Last week I did the prologue and then the first 8 chapters of the book, and chapter 8 was quite a banger, I must say. This week, let's see, what chapters did I get through this week? I got through chapter 23, so I read chapters 9 through 23, which combined I believe is 14 chapters, so a not insignificant amount. I read for about 8.5 hours compared to last week's 7 hours. So just a little bit more in comparison, but I'm just over halfway through the book. I want to say about 53% is what it was when I just did a quick calculation, well, a few hours ago for Goodreads. Well, I guess this morning for Goodreads, but when you're seeing this, it will have all been yesterday, so that's all fine and dandy. What I've been reading through this week has been really great. I think pretty consistent 5 stars, like I'm really enjoying myself. There were a couple chapters that, going through my notes and when creating notes for them, my chapter by chapter summaries, and not summaries, more like just thoughts and reactions, I suppose, to each chapter. I've been going through, there's a couple chapters that I had actually forgotten about in the grand scheme of things, but a lot of other stuff that has been really thought-provoking and interesting, and then some other material that has just been really enjoyable and high quality. Like, just, I've been really just having a good time. In terms of like the actual spoiler-free thoughts of the book, I'm going to say like some of the developments that have been occurring, like there's been a little bit more world building and I suppose to a certain degree lore stuff that has been happening. There's some more history and I guess it could count as an element of world building for like certain groups of people. It's not really that spoilery to say that we've gotten a lot more of the Aes Sedai in this book so far compared to Eye of the World and the stuff that Robert Jordan has been doing with them so far. I've actually been really enjoying up to this point. I'm not a hater of the Aes Sedai yet. We'll see how long that lasts based off of what most people seem to think about them. But as of yet, I don't dislike them, but I've enjoyed all of that. I've enjoyed some of the additional world-building elements that Jordan has started to include and utilize and balance in the story with some others. I've enjoyed some more of the travelings. One of the other things I believe I mentioned maybe in the spoiler-free last week was POVs, where Eye of the World more or less was just Rand's POV. There was a section in the middle where it split off and included Nynaeve's POV for a couple chapters, and it included Perrin's POV for a few chapters. But beyond those two, there might have been another additional POV shortly, but if there was, it was only for like one chapter or for one part of a chapter. I don't remember for certain, but either way, for the most part, like the vast majority of that book was just Rand. This book has been a lot more flip-floppy and been going between different characters, and I'm actually really enjoying that. I've liked the way that it has expanded characters and filled and fleshed them out a little bit more for me as a reader to get to know them. One character in particular, which we'll discuss closer to the end of the spoiler-filled portion of this video. It's just all really working for me, all things considered. And it doesn't necessarily surprise me too much, considering that I feel like the vast majority of people think that The Great Hunt is a significant step up from Eye of the World. But I just kind of went into the book just like, hey, I enjoyed Eye of the World a lot. Let's just see what happens with this book. And up to this point, I think dang near all of it has worked for me a lot more than Eye of the World already did. There's been a couple elements that I'm not like the hottest on yet. I think that I just need a little bit more warming up to them, but we'll get into that a little bit later. I think that's all I need to say for the spoiler-free. In fact, it might as well be all I say about the spoiler-free. Let's just kind of go into the spoiler-filled. Like I mentioned, last week I did get through Chapter 8, so this week I'm going to be discussing some of the different events and happenings and my thoughts on Chapters 9 through 23. So starting off, I did start off with Chapter 9, which was leave takings, and not gonna lie, I kind of forgot a lot of what happened in this chapter up until I, kind of like looked through it so that I could write my notes down for it. But I did think that like the first half of the chapter was rather uneventful with the actual leave takings part of it, but the back half I thought was rather notable when I reminded myself of it. Having a POV from I guess the boatmaster from Eye of the World that Rand and Matt rode with for a short time. Did Tom? Yes, it was Rand, Matt, and Tom Maryland that all rode with Bail Domon. Bail Domon? I don't know how to pronounce his name. Sorry, I'm going to butcher every name in the series. But the boatmaster from Eye of the World that they rode with for a certain distance up until... Oh man, I don't remember some of these location names off the top of my head. They rode from Baerlon to Whitebridge, I believe it was. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that's where they rode essentially there. I mean, they might have... It might not have been from Baerlon to Whitebridge, but it was from on the journeys there. But they rode up to Whitebridge with this boatmaster, and I've been spending way too long on this point. But there was... The back half of Chapter 9 contain this POV, and there's some little drops of stuff that Jordan is, including in this chapter that I'm finding really interesting. A lot of it with, with him leaving Ilion, getting like this sort of invitation, not an invitation, a letter from somebody being like, hey, here's a job for you. We're going to pay you to do this job. There's this much now and you'll get this much later. And it seems like he's going the opposite direction from it. I have no idea what this plot line will become or how it pertains to the story or what the importance of it is. But the fact that we know this character already and there's some sort of mystery going on with him that we don't fully understand, I'm very excited and curious to see what happens from this in the future. Up to the point that I'm at through chapter 23, I haven't seen anything of it happen again yet, so I'm just kind of keeping that on the back burner. But from this point on is pretty much from where the hunt begins, essentially. That's literally what chapter 10 is called, is the hunt begins. So these next couple chapters have included a little bit more interesting material, where Eye of the World, a lot of like the journeyings and the travelings of that book were just kind of like, basically just characters like going from one place to another, trying to reach another place because they need to get there, essentially is what a lot of that book was doing in terms of its journeys and its travelings. This book is a little bit different. The journeys and the travelings that are happening here, at least in this first act of the book, this first part of it, these early sections, I suppose, if that's what you want to consider them. The way that the travelings have worked here has been really interesting in the sense that rather Rand and co trying to escape something, they're actually chasing after something. I like the way that this kind of hunt for the horn, but really the hunt for the people who stole the horn, and also Matt's dagger, which having the two of them together is actually really nice, convenient plot-wise in a way. Not in a bad way. That's not a criticism. It's just nice that those two are together. From a character perspective, that's definitely a pretty nice thing. It's not nice that either of them got stolen, but the fact that they're together is pretty hype, so that they can just, chase one group of people and find them. I was enjoying these travelings. Chapters 10 and 11 featured quite a bit of material in the terms of, let's see. Yes, there was literally a paragraph here that I wrote at the end of my thoughts for chapter 11 was to reiterate that Jordan is still willing to get brutal in these books. I think one of the misconceptions that I had, and maybe plenty of other readers, is that, the Wheel of Time doesn't get dark, or it isn't that brutal. It isn't, dark in the way that some other fantasy, especially a lot of modern fantasy at this point, like to get. But there were some moments in chapters 10 and 11 that were a little bit darker and more violent, more brutal than I thought they were. I think the reason that the Wheel of Time doesn't have this sort of reputation for it is the fact that Jordan keeps a lot of it off screen. He keeps a lot of it implied. But if you're thinking about it hard enough, it's really actually kind of dark, some of the stuff that he has characters doing. And I really enjoyed not just, Rand and co, all of this party chasing after the Trollocs and Pat and Fane as the people who stole the horn and the dagger, not just searching for them and being led on a wild goose chase. Well, not really a wild goose chase essentially, but being led through south, heading mostly south for the most part, and at basically each pit stop, like finding more bodies and more violence for their sniffer to be able to find, which was a really cool thing to include, like these people who can like sniff, like, and smell violence, you know, smell when murders happen, and be able to trace that to some extent. I kind of like that idea. It's a fun way to have a new type of tracking without just tracking, you know, people through the forest again. So obviously they have trackers to be able to do that, but I like this new element. But that's kind of besides the point. But beyond that, there was a little bit of POV from Fane here as well that I thought was actually really interesting, because for a couple reasons. The first one of those reasons was because it really sells the fact that Fane is a really disconcerting character. He's really kind of creepy. I do not like, obviously I don't like him, like he's not a good guy, but just the way that I just find his character to be sold and written very well. Like, it might seem to some extent like sort of like cartoony, I guess, you know, like sort of stereotypical, I suppose, to some degree, depending on how you think of it, but I think it works very well for the story and for the kind of character that Jordan obviously wants Fane to be at this point. Like, just kind of like, you know, he's a bad guy and he's doing bad things and he's kind of crazy. Like, I think he's written well despite being somewhat stereotypical to that degree. But the other reason that I thought this specific POV from Pat and Fane in this section was interesting was that I'm pretty sure, based off of a couple things that were kind of like dropped in his thoughts and the things that he said, the way that he behaved, I'm pretty sure Fane is actually the POV from the prologue of this book, the one called Boars. The man who the prologue makes a point of saying, the man who called himself Boars, like 50 million times it seemed like throughout that prologue. I'm pretty sure Fane is that person. I might be wrong on that, but based off of the way a couple things played out, or not even played out, just a couple like little hints in this POV, I think that might be the case. If I'm wrong, I'm sure I'll probably figure it out at some point later, but if I'm right, it's nice to know that I'm kind of on track. So we'll see how that goes. But moving on to a little bit more in the chapter, like a lot happened in what I read. So this video is probably going to be pretty long, actually. There was a lot going on. Part of that is also because multi-POVs. Having multiple POVs and multiple different plot lines going is actually quite awesome. Let's see if I can figure out what I'm going to talk about next at this point. I think I mentioned in the spoiler-free portion of this video a little bit that I've enjoyed being able to get to see a little bit more of the Aes Sedai, like some sort of the more back-end stuff with them, sort of training and political related stuff with them, and especially where that interweaves with characters like Egwene and Nynaeve, who are essentially being converted is not the right word, although I'm sure some people might want to call that the right word, being, you know, enlisted, you know, recruited to be novices, or even accepted in Nynaeve's case, as it turns out, to, you know, join the Aes Sedai, which is really neat because, you know, this was something that we were kind of hinting at for a little while. So to start to see Aes Sedai training with them is also really nice. And I don't know, like a lot of it just kind of works, even though like there's not a whole lot happening, but it leaves a lot of intrigue with those characters and kind of what's going to go on with them in the future. So a couple of the next couple things that have happened in the book so far was something that I think I might actually not be the hottest on in terms of just how they work and how I'm understanding them and the way they behave with the world are, I don't even know what to call them. I think they're called mirrors of the wheel or something, as they're called a little bit later in the book. But these moments when, you know, Rand essentially falls asleep and the group, well, he and Loyal and what is his name? Huron? Is that his name? Huron, I believe, the sniffer for the group, the one who can smell the violence when it happens and stuff like that. So these three basically get transported to like a mirror of the wheel, so like a different version of the world, which was something that seemed kind of random when they fell asleep, like next to this, you know, sort of strange stone that it seemed like Aes Sedai were able to use at one point, and potentially even people before the Aes Sedai. I'm not sure how I feel about this element because the way it's utilized through the story is kind of strange. I kind of like some of the things that it leads to and some of the ideas it provides, but I'm not sure how convinced I am that it like makes sense, so to speak. Obviously they're meant to be compared to the ways to a certain degree, because I believe it said at one point that the ways were kind of based off of these mirrors of the wheel essentially, the development of the ways, but a lot of the way that this kind of works with the world is really interesting. Like I mentioned in the spoiler-free portion, I like that Jordan is including new elements into the world building and the way those work, and I like that they're kind of consistent with other elements, like they kind of touch on each other or seem to have been based on one another to some degree, and I like those aspects of it, but I'm not entirely sure I liked how they were utilized in the story. Like, it just seemed a little bit whiplashy. Like, that's literally what I said about chapter 13. It seemed like it all came out of literally nowhere when it all happened, but I was looking forward to seeing what Jordan would do with it, and I like one of the things that he did with it, which we'll talk about in just a second, because yeah, this book jumps around all over the place. Actually, we might as well just kind of jump into it right now. I like the way that Rand and the party kind of travel through this mirror of the world and basically don't come across anybody or anything until they come across another character who happens to be from their world, it seems, named Selene. So this is the famous, or maybe infamous, Selene that everybody talks about. So this is a name that I'm quite familiar with because I see it all the time in random Wheel of Time discussion, even if I have no idea what people are talking about when they say her name. This is the Selene that everybody's talking about, and up to chapter 23, I have no idea how I felt. I was not necessarily down on her character the first couple scenes that we had with her. But there's some other scenes later in this portion that I read that I'm like, I don't know, she seems rather sus to me. There's something about her character just isn't jiving, and I'm not entirely sure why. There's just something that's not working fully. It's not that I don't like the character, or I don't think the character works. There's just something about her that seems off, and that could very well be intentional, but I'm definitely catching something that seems weird about her. But before we move on with this, I also want to mention that a little bit earlier, before the characters actually met Selene, I actually really appreciated chapter 15, which Kinslayer. So chapter 15. This chapter starts off with another one of those, I think it's a dream sequence. It might not be a dream sequence depending on how you interpret it based off of this being in a mirror of the wheel. But it's similar to all of the dream sequences where Rand has interacted with the Dark One. The interaction between these two in chapter 15 is absolutely the best one up to this point. I really enjoyed everything about it. The tension of it, everything is always so palpable and visceral with these interactions, and I just love them. They're so high quality, just really enjoyable to read as well. Like they're really quick to read. I want to say normally it takes me about 3 minutes or so to read a page of one of these books. When I'm reading these moments, these scenes, it takes me only 2 minutes because I'm just plowing through. I'm really enjoying those sections. But I love the way that this interaction in particular, one of the reasons why I think I like it so much, is because it emphasizes not just Rand's fears and his alienations that he feels about himself, but also his conviction, his confidence in himself as well. And confidence might not be the right word, but it's kind of how I'm thinking about it at the moment. His conviction, like I said, his commitment to what he believes, whether it's real or not. The fact that he refuses essentially to be a pawn of either the Dark One or Tarvalon, regardless of whether he's the Dragon Reborn or not, just leaves him to be okay, I'm not the Dragon Reborn. I'm not going to be part of this. I'm not going to be used by you people. That's a really respectable aspect to this character, even if it is kind of funny being the reader and being yeah, he's the Dragon Reborn. He needs to stop resisting that fact. But it's really interesting to kind of get that conflict within his character itself. It's something that I've been really enjoying reading about. And in terms of how characters think about themselves as well, I might as well go back to chapter 14. I'm jumping all around. I know, I'm sorry, but that's kind of how the book is as well. Chapter 14, titled Wolf Brother. So the second book in a row to contain a chapter called Wolf Brother. This one is about Perrin. I love the way that Perrin also as well confronts his wolf brother sense and thinks of himself, his lack of confidence, because that's what it is. Rand isn't necessarily confident in himself so much as he does just have a conviction, and he's just going to follow through with that. The way that Perrin and Rand think about themselves, and sort of the way they think about each other too, is something that I find interesting. I think it's something that Jordan has been doing rather intentionally. He's been sort of mirroring these two characters to some degree. I don't know what kind of thematic purpose that might have throughout the rest of the series, but I'd like the way that he's been doing that in this book so far. But yeah, moving back on to the topic of Rand, I suppose, and his little group of people. I suppose I'll kind of cover a little bit more of what's happening with these characters specifically, and then I'll move on to some of the others from other POVs. Sorry, this video is going to be a little bit more rough. I'm going to have to develop some way to kind of consistently talk about everything that I read each week without just jumping back and forth like every single chapter, doing like, well, this was this character and this thing, and this was that character. Like, I'm going to have to figure out some way to adapt this for the future, but either way, starting in chapter 19 was basically where I continued, and was when I brought up my... It was when I brought up like my uncertainty about the mirrors of the wheel, and how I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, how I think I'm mixed on certain aspects of it. But I did enjoy the fact that this was kind of what I was mentioning a little bit earlier. One of the things that Jordan does with the mirrors of the wheel I thought was interesting, even if I don't know how I feel about the mirror itself. The way that Huron, as the sniffer for the group, was able to track the horn that they're hunting, essentially. Track the horn through this mirror of the way, but as they were going further, the scent was getting fainter. I appreciated the fact that this actually meant something. It wasn't just, you know, like a wild goose chase, or, you know, some sort of uncertainty of like the character just kind of following nothing or anything like that. It was the fact that Celine kind of explained it earlier. She was like, well, this is a mirror of the wheel. Like, this is just kind of a strange place. Kind of like a reflection of the real world, a different version of the real world, where certain major events, where certain real events, what's the word that I'm thinking of, occurred differently in the past, and therefore the world is different in this version of it. So it's kind of like an explanation of it. I don't know if how I said it made any sense. It probably didn't, but that's fine. I appreciated that Celine, using this explanation, was enabled to say, well, we haven't seen any evidence that these, you know, Trollocs and Pat and Fane have, you know, tromped through here with the horn. Maybe if we go to that stone over there, and especially since we need to get to the real world again anyway at some point, like, you're going to do that, Rand. It was just kind of the sense that, you know, Celine's all like, okay, well, if we go back to the real world, I bet that this trail that you guys have been sniffing out right now is basically the fact that this is something great about to happen in the world. Like, the horn traveling through here is a big moment for the world, so that's why you can sense the trail, is you're telling that this is something that's about to happen in the real world. I don't know why that makes sense or why it works, but I like the idea of it regardless. So basically the characters go back into the real world, and they sit in the mountains waiting for the Trollocs and Pat and Fane with the horn and the dagger to come to them, and after a few days they do. So that was, you know, pretty fun and interesting thing to happen, even if some aspect of it, like, I'm still not sure how much it makes sense or why it makes sense. I like the ideas that are being introduced regardless, but generally speaking, I did love the retrieval of the horn and the escape that the party made. I thought that that all was really fun and interesting to occur, but this, you know, kind of led way for some other really interesting things to happen as well. So when traveling a little bit further, this group of people with Rand and Celine and Huron and Loyal are making their way to Carrion. I hope that's how that's pronounced. Correct me if I'm wrong, since they're basically in the mountain past the Kinslayer's Dagger, I believe it's called. So that's, you know, basically directly south by however many miles. I don't know if there's a scale on this map. It doesn't look like it. So south by a fair distance from Faldara, where the book started, but they were basically at the tip of the Kinslayer's, is that Kinslayer? Yeah, Kinslayer's Dagger, and they're making their way to Carrion over the next couple chapters. This small little group is. They come across something when they're basically, you know, coming close to the border of this new area, I suppose. Like, sorry, my summaries and explanations not making any sense even to myself. I'm sorry if you're suffering through this video. But I thought chapter 20 was really good. I'm not entirely sure what happened with Rand and this, like, sphere that basically made him, like, whatever it was, interaction that Rand had with basically the one power and the sphere in chapter 20 was really cool, even if I'm not entirely sure what all of it means. And just kind of the way that Jordan has kind of put Rand in situations where he's just been using or doing stuff with his powers, even though he doesn't want to be touching the one source. And no matter how much he says he won't touch it again, he just ends up doing it a couple times, whether consciously or not. I really like that Jordan's been doing that, but this chapter is really interesting for that reason. There's a little bit more of this, like characters being in an inn and sort of traveling, a chapter that, might be similar to Eye of the World, where, say, Matt and Rand were kind of traveling through and making their way and managing to find a place to eat and sleep some nights by playing the flute and juggling. Rand plays the flute again for some people in this little small town that they're in. I forget what it's called. There's some interesting stuff that happens in this town as well. Let's see if I can find what it is. Concerning the fact that basically Selene leaves the group in the morning. So this little group is spending time in this little town, and Selene is really upset that Rand doesn't want to keep the horn, and that's part of the reason why I find her very suspicious, because Rand doesn't want the horn. He doesn't want the glory for it, or at least he says that. He says he doesn't want the glory of having the horn, and he doesn't want it, and Selene is not happy with him for this reason, and I'm not sure why. Like I said, it's kind of suspicious. I maybe have a couple ideas that I'm not entirely sure, but there's some interesting aspects to that as well. But the fact that basically Selene just leaves in the morning of this because she doesn't like another of the characters that they meet in this inn, I suppose, is a little bit strange. But like, I'm just kind of interested to see where Rand's storyline goes with the horn and how this specific aspect develops over time. I'm not entirely sure what's going to be happening with it, but like I said, I am interested to see what happens with it. But moving on, I suppose I should just kind of get to one of the other storylines that I kind of want to talk about, because I've been recording for a good long while. Let me look. Yeah, I've already been recording for 30 minutes, and I have a bit of talking to do. This video is not going to be good. But kind of where I touched on earlier with the Aes Sedai stuff once again, and how it interacts with Egwene and Nynaeve. Chapter 18 is where these two are essentially traveling to the White Tower, and they're about to get introduced to the White Tower. Some more of these training moments, and we get a little bit more in-depth thoughts into how Egwene and Nynaeve are, and what they think about the Aes Sedai, and how they interact with the Aes Sedai. All of this I find really interesting. As they're going on their way to the White Tower. Yeah, that was basically the chapter where that happened. The next chapter is really good where this stuff happens, chapter 23, but I do want to touch on chapter 22 briefly, where Moraine and Lan are somewhere else. I forget exactly where else they are. It's someplace other than the White Tower, that's for sure, but they're basically trying to get information about stuff regarding the Dragon Reborn, and how, some of the writings of the Dragon Reborn and the prophecies are, so that Moraine might be getting an idea for some of the things that Rand might be in for, what Rand might be needing to do. Not sure why this is, but I like that we basically get a confirmation, essentially, that the Black Aja actually exists. So essentially Aes Sedai that are sided with the Dark One, because of the fact that Moraine nearly died in this chapter, in chapter 22. That was kind of a crazy moment. I would have been rather sad to see Nynaeve or Moraine die, even though I already knew that she was going to live in the past books. Like, some stuff it's kind of hard to not get like spoilers for. I've not been spoiled on anything, but like, I knew that she wasn't going to die, but it was still a tense moment regardless. But the chapter that I do really want to talk about here is the last one that I read, and that was chapter 23, called The Testing. This one was for Nynaeve, because Egwene and Nynaeve coming to the White Tower. Egwene's basically being brought in as a novice, and Nynaeve is being brought in for eligibility of being an accepted, which is kind of crazy. She's not even having to go through the novice training and stuff first. I guess she's, got enough power with the one power, so to speak, that she can do this. Not entirely sure all of the distinctions between all of that stuff, but chapter 23 was really cool regardless. So essentially, in order to be, one of the accepted, I think it's in order to actually be one of the accepted, these girls have to go through a trial, testing, where they go through a few different gateways, essentially, into confrontations of their greatest fears. The first one is of the past, the second one is of the present, the third one is of the future. I really liked the concept of this because, I think like the one for the past is like, if you go into this, you're going to be confronted by fears that you had in your past, or fears that you might still have from your past. This might be a better way of thinking of it. The second test is fears that you might have of things that are happening right now. So for Nynaeve, for example, the second test I thought was a really good one because her fear was essentially that Emmons Field, back in the Two Rivers, was falling into some sort of like disorder with a bunch of people who weren't good for the town, and where she wasn't in favor, and where she basically had to abandon one of her friends to be hurt or something because of her being there. I'm not entirely sure all of that for certain, but like the idea of Emmons Field falling into some sort of disorder gives me it makes me panic for whatever reason as well. So I thought that this second test was written very well, because the fact that it was, you know, a representation of Nynaeve's fear of this, and the fact that I was reacting to it as well, just really worked for me. But a little bit furthermore, the third test, so the one for the future, of fears of something that the character who goes into it has for the future, I guess. This one for Nynaeve worked very well because it actually humanized her character for me. I think this is the first moment where I felt like, oh, I think I can actually sympathize with Nynaeve at the moment. And although I've been not necessarily the biggest fan of the idea of Lance and Nynaeve's relationship, them having feelings for each other, this little bit actually kind of worked for me, because it is like a potential or hypothetical future where Nynaeve and Lan are married and have kids in the future, and the fact that Nynaeve has to go through and pass all of these. So passing the tests basically means you're going through and you're confronting these fears, and you have to leave them. So it's as if they're kind of like real moments. So Nynaeve goes into this third test, it's like, oh, in this version of the world or whatever, I'm married to Lan, but I need to leave, and I don't want to leave with what he's saying. Like, this is kind of a crazy thing. And I just thought it all really worked. I don't think I'm very well expressing what actually happens, but the anguish that Nynaeve felt through these few tests was really palpable, and was it just worked to the best of anything that Jordan has done with this character, where Nynaeve was not a character that I was super hot on last book, or even this book up to this point, essentially. I even called her a very not nice word in one of my chapter summaries for Eye of the World, because she was, well, she was being one. But this book, like, Robert Jordan has made her character sympathetic to me for the first time, but we'll see how long that lasts. But yeah, that's basically the end of what I'm going to talk about here. That's all the stuff that I read. It's just kind of a lot. A lot of this I read over the last few days and barely made chapter summaries for it today. Barely got time to do so because I knew I'd be having to record this evening. But yeah, that's basically what I read over the last week. I didn't make sense. I wasn't able to find a way to... I didn't come up with a way ahead of time to structure this to kind of make more sense of what I'm talking about and what actually happened, so I apologize for that. But I'm gonna have to figure out a way to do that better in the future. But maybe I just won't read as much of the book this week so that I don't have that much struggle. But yeah, like, a lot happened in what I read. A lot of it was really good. A lot of it was really interesting. Some of it might not have worked so much. But yeah, if you happen to watch through this jumbled mess of a video, I apologize for your sanity, because I would go insane watching this. In fact, I'm probably going to go insane watching this, editing it like here in 5 minutes. So thank you guys for watching. If you did, if you've been enjoying my ramblings on these books and just kind of my experience going through them, and been watching, I very much appreciate you. Next week, I will obviously be doing another one of these, and then the week after that should be the last one for this book. I've been playing through, like I said, I'm a little bit over halfway through, and this is only the second diary for the book. So yeah, I'm probably going to finish this right on track with what I thought I was. In fact, I'm a chapter ahead right now, and I could have gotten a couple more chapters ahead, but I had something else that I wanted to catch up on reading this morning, and I'm actually really glad that I made that decision, because if I read even more of this book this morning and had even more that I needed to talk about here, that would have been a mess. And considering that last week I ended off with chapter 8, which was a banger of a chapter, and 23 is where I left off this week, which was also a banger of a chapter, I think it works fairly well for me anyway. So again, thank you guys for watching all the way through, if you did, because if you watched all the way through this, you're a trooper and you have my respect, because this is rough, I'm sure. But thank you again for watching. I'll be back for another one of these next week as always. I'm not sure what's coming out for the book binge on Tuesday. I don't recall. I really don't. So if these are all that you're interested in anyway, like I said, another one will come out next Thursday. So thank you guys for watching. I'll be back in the next video.